Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Iain Campbell. I'm one of the owners of Tropical Birding Tours, but I'm also a student at UNSW. So I'm doing a doctorate on bird habitats. At the moment, I'm sitting in South Korea. I'm on tour. It's 2 in the morning. Um, but my background was geology to begin with, always being a fanatical birder, and then uh, doing birding for a career. And I've I've been doing that for 20 years now, but as I was doing it, I was getting more and more frustrated with the way habitats presented or the fact that people weren't thinking holistically. So that's why I started working on this project. But basically, this project here, I'm going to move this. Sorry, I'm looking away from the screen because I'm getting disturbed by the images there. Um, but this project is a more or less not quite a sales pitch on the habitats of Africa. It's a new book that's just come out, and it's designed for not just vegetation people, but it's for birders. And you could use a pretentious title as the Rosetta Stone for birders and botanists. But we're using it as part of a bigger project to delineate habitats using birds. Okay, so let's dive into it now. And it doesn't want to dive into it. Yes, it does, right? So originally we did, and this is 5 years ago now, we did Habitats of the World, which was a broad book, and we did this as a proof of concept. Interestingly, this was going to take a few years to write, but then COVID hit, so we had nothing better to do than just get this straight out. And it's a very general book, and it's written in a style that non-specialists can read. We wanted other people to be able to read it. And it was so successful that we thought, okay, well, can we actually do this as a system? Because I'd been working on it on my own. We decided, yes, we'll do it as a system and we'll actually start building up a classification of vegetation around the world. Again, that's written in a way and described in a way that people can enjoy it. So this is the Africa book's part of a global series, and at the moment, North America and Africa are out, and so we're doing this in April 2025. The Europe will be out later this year, and Australia should be out by September 2025, and we're working on Asia at the moment. But at the end, there'll be 7 books. What's not shown here is the Oceania book, and then a global book again. But the whole idea is that everyone can understand it. If you've had a more or less a high school education, you should be able to go in and read this and put it all together. So I'll go through a little bit in a minute, but just the pretense of the book is putting climate, vegetation, descriptions, and birds in one piece. So you'll see here that each of these biomes, you have the silhouettes of the habitat, you have basic descriptions, climate, and I'll show one of these graphs and explain it a little bit later. But basically, if you look here all over Africa, if you have this purple throughout the time, this is a Walter Light diagram, by the way, and that's where you plot temperature versus precipitation. You can see in areas where it's orange, plants are stressed. In area where it's purple, there's absolute surplus, and blue is where there's water in the system. So, a lowland rainforest habitat will be surplus of water the whole year. Deserts can have little pits of blue, but generally they're in water stress over here for most of the year. And through the bottom, and this might interest our guests from Côte d'Ivoire, is a diagram seeing how the habitats change going through West Africa from desert into lowland rainforest, and the precipitation matches that. And also the period, the length of the dry season and the area of plant stress. And we also describe the way the habitats have their boundaries, because this is important for birding, because it's not a case of just a straight forest and grassland. You've got different ways that they mix. And it's not just, again, vegetation. Like we may say melange and mosaic are both ways that two vegetation types will blend in with each other. The difference is when you're in a mosaic, you're looking at birds in a little forest block, then a birds in a grassland, then a birds in a dryland. In a melange is where it's all together, and you may be in a system. Think about a swamp system where you've got mangroves right next to rainforest. The birds are passing over and they're passing through the different habitats. So it's very difficult to say, okay, is that bird from the mangrove or is it from the rainforest? That's why we use that designation. And then you've got nebulous, and this is like, say, Nama Karoo blending into succulent Karoo over a broad area, trying to work out where that boundary is. So this is what the book looks like. And so obviously, I want you to buy the book, and I'm going to try and do a sales pitch here. But the book, basically, you get your distribution maps, and a lot of these maps are built on a combination of three different mapping systems. And we went through and determined which was the best map for this habitat based on birds. We have silhouettes, the climate graphs. Again, you can look here and you can see that it's a Mediterranean climate with most rain coming earlier in the year. And then you have photographs of your habitat, and then the descriptions. So conservation, and then lots of wildlife. So again, if you dive in at any one piece, most people should be able to work out what's going on. This one is designed. The global books were designed for people to look at places around the world with no idea, and learn something. But people from that location might not get so much. So as an Australian looking at the global book, I may not learn that much just from my place, but I'd learn a lot from another area. However, these books are designed for people from even in that area. So a South African should be able to learn a lot more about even their patch with this book than the previous title. And again, then we go into reptiles, and the last thing here is where to see, where are the best examples of this habitat. So I'll go in detail into some of the habitats later, and with the pretty birds and pictures, but I wanted to explain why we're doing this, because this is an immense amount of work. For me, it's pretty much, I do a bit of guiding on the side now, but this is pretty much my life it'll end up being 6 years, the whole project. And it's mainly because we're bird guides and we're conservationists. So there are three things that have always kind of bugged me. One is that most field guides don't deal with habitats. So when you're reading about whether you pick up a mammal guide, a new bird guide, they do a little bit, but they don't really dive in. And also, it doesn't match between books. So what people are calling things doesn't match. So I was just looking at the bird book for Mongolia, and then looking across to the bird book for Central Asia, and the same habitats have vastly different names, even within bird books. So the birders' language isn't uniform. Forget the vegetation people. Even what we agree is a grassland doesn't always match. And I want to show you this here. This is a picture of a couple of different habitats. We've got three of them, but the other thing that kind of gets me is these are from three different continents. And if you were to quickly, name what three continents there were, you might be getting a bit of a clue now on the left. But on the top, we have a shrub desert from the northern part of the Sahara. And the base shot there at the bottom is Puna in in the Andes of northwestern Argentina. And then the image that disappeared was a shrubland, chenopod shrubland from Australia. Now, for the purposes of ecology, they're all very, very similar. So what we wanted to do is show that a lot of the habitats they have analogies in other parts of the world. We just don't know that we don't see them straight off. So I looked up how many papers that mention the karoo also mention either shrub desert in northern Africa, um, the chenopod shrubland in Australia, or the puna of Argentina, and it was less than 1%. So most people working on this thing don't see the potential relationships with other areas. And the third one is that conservationists are using mapping systems and words for habitats around the world, but these classifications are based on vegetation and structure. They're not they're not based on the animals that live within them. So you can be doing a thing we're talking about, well, we're going to protect woodland birds, but we don't know what the woodlands are, or we don't know how to describe the woodlands, and then when we do, none of them relate to the birds that were in them anyway, or not all of them. And that's very common when you look at the Key Biodiversity Areas project, and other IUCN projects. So that's why we wanted to create something uniform. To give you an example of this is an Australian example, but I'm using this to treat it. Conservationists or the vegetation mappers have the one unit around Australia. And where you look at these dots, you've got the purple dot up around Darwin and Adelaide. They are mapped as the same habitat. So it wraps all the way around. And this is the same as whether you've got stuff that's some of the savannas in Africa as well, in Asia, and even the chacos and savannas through South America. But this is a one mapping system, right? I want you to also look at these other dots that are to the east, because you'll see the same habitat here. The one on the left is that habitat in the Northern Territory, and the one on the right is Adelaide Hills in Southern Australia. They're mapped as the same. Structurally, they're very similar. The species are actually very similar. And they've both got a grassy understory. But there's only 16% overlap in the terrestrial bird assemblage. And this is very much the same as we have in Africa, and well, all throughout the world. So we're seeing the same thing over and over. However, very close to each other, when I showed that purple dot, sorry, the blue dot in the northern Australia, these savannas look very different, and they're a good 1,200 kilometers apart, but there's an 86% overlap. So what birds are using is not what vegetation mapping is defining. And that's a problem for birders and bird conservation. So what we tried to do is we're building a global classification based on around 45,000 basal units. We get the smallest unit in a mapping system. We work out what that is, what are the birds that are in it, and then redefine it. But with the 11,000 birds, we're coming up with something around, we haven't done Asia, South America, or Oceania yet, but we're going to come around with something around the high 500s, low 600s mark. So I want to just dive into how we do it. Again, mapping, this is the North American assemblage. In North America, they use 4 big macro groups for all the conifer forests in North America. And they have 4 macro groups across the very top. And within it, you dive down the next layer, there are 12 groups and 25 associations. Now, on a macro group scale, this is a blackpoll warbler on the right. On a macro group scale, you've got the one system. Broadly, it's the same. And the bird assemblage, whether you're in Alaska or in Nova Scotia or Newfoundland, it's the same bird assemblage on a broad scale. However, when you dive in deep and when you pull it apart, you'll see there are all these microhabitats, and that look vastly different. So on the left, this is a microhabitat that's not normally mapped, which is it's an open woodland with a tundra understory, And it's got things like Hudsonian goldwits and Bonaparte's gulls nesting on it. Another microhabitat is this subarctic riparian woodland, which is like, birches and willows along little creeks. They've got conifer forests all around them, but in there, and they have a bird assemblage with things like blue throats, okay, and Arctic warblers. These things were lost in the broad mapping, but if you remap with birds on, sorry, when you take into account birds and remap them, you'll find that you can pass out these microhabitats. But because the African mapping system is using three different ones, like for North America, we had their one mapping system that I could understand. In Africa, you have SANVI in South Africa, and in North Africa, you're using the International Vegetation Classification, and you're using the White's mapping vegetation from the late 60s, early 70s. We had to go through and go down to basal units again and work out, okay, in South Africa, when they're calling this, what does that equate to in East Africa when they and then what are the bird assemblages? Do they match? And then we make them into the one. So I'm just checking the time. Yep, good. Plenty of time. Um, and that's how we came up with 78 habitats for Africa. Okay. So Africa, we've lumped them into there are 12 biomes in the continent. There are 13 in the world. Africa's missing one, and that's the sclerophyll forests of Eastern Australia. Sorry, the sclerophyll forests of Australia. That's the only biome that Africa misses. So it's got all of the others. But they include things like deserts with their 11 habitats. So, you know, such as your your dune sands of Namibia, your dunes and ergs, which is a name of sand dune in the Sahara. You might have your shrub deserts. This is a reg desert. This is equivalent to a gibber desert in Australia with bat-eared foxes. Um, and this is a desert that only flushes. It flushes after periods of rain that may only occur every couple of years. For the most of the time, it's just a bunch of rocks, but underneath, those rocks pack above a level of clay and sand, and it just comes to life after a good dose of rain. Another one are the warm, humid forests. These are typically rainforests and monsoonal forests. This is a monsoonal forest of Tanzania. So that's broadleaf. They're not deciduous. Always more or less always wet. Monsoonal forests obviously have dry periods, but with 10 habitats. The dry deciduous habitats in Africa, we've only got a couple of those. And these are systems that in the wet season can look very much like a rainforest. Some of the Angolan forest during the wet, you wouldn't know. You'd think you're in a broadleaf, humid broadleaf forest. But in the dry season, at least, well, a large percentage of the trees drop their leaves. So you'll have periods where the canopy's all open, leafless, and you've got a few evergreens underneath, but predominantly everything's lost its leaves and it's very dry and crunchy on the ground. Also loaded with birds that only specialize in that habitat. Savannas are probably more what people are familiar with in Africa. And these, interestingly, not the way some people think of a savanna. People imagine a savanna as being these vast areas of grassland. Well, no, that's not how savannas are defined worldwide. Savannas usually have a tree component. Definitely grassland understory, tropical grasses, but generally with a tree component. That's what distinguishes it from a grassland. This is your grassland. So here, this is what you typically see. This is the Highveld of South Africa, lowland tropical grasses and Afrotropical highland grasses in the north. And then Mediterraneans. are your other ones. And this is your fynbos in South Africa, your Strandveld, your Renosterveld. These are the habitats associated with that. But you've also got the same system, but at opposite times of the year. So in the southern ones, you've got wet winters, and in the northern ones, in the Mediterranean, you've also got wet winters, but your winters are opposite because you're opposite sides of the equator. And this is really interesting in that the South African heathlands or the Mediterranean scrubs, they link up with the Australia ones very closely. There are lots of similarities in the Australian habitats, and interestingly, in Australia we don't really divide them out. So we don't divide fynbos, an equivalent of fynbos and Wallam, sorry, fynbos and Strandveld. So what we do, we've redefined the Australian system based on the South African one. Said, okay, you've got this rocky heath habitat, coastal, just like fynbos. It's in Australia. Let's rename it. So I'm just going to take a good look at what you get in the book for one of these accounts. This is the spiny forest of southwestern Madagascar. So these are PDFs, screenshots from the book. But in each of the habitats, you get a silhouette again with your person for scale. The interesting thing you look at is we do in a nutshell. Okay, so in a nutshell is what's the elevator pitch on this habitat? So it's a dry forest from Madagascar, mostly deciduous trees with many spiny plants, the octopus tree in the bottom. So this is one of those things that it could be argued as not a full desert, as a semi-desert, but we put it in the desert grouping. It's got the global habitat affinity, sorry, a Sertão Caatinga in, you see here, Catar, Sertão Caatinga in, and I'm butchering the Portuguese, sorry, in Brazil, and the Sonoran Desert, which is the cactus desert around Tucson. So you get global affinities, then you get the continental affinities like Albany thicket in South Africa, and then the species overlap. And that, so you may have your affinities may be completely with things in other parts of the continent, but your species overlap are where the birds in that habitat are found in other closely associated habitats or geographically close habitats. So the Indian Ocean lowland rainforest is not similar to the Malagasy spiny forest, but there are a bunch of Madagascan birds that are endemics that move between the two. And then we have the climate graph again, and this tells you that there is some water there in the summer season, in the summer months with monsoonal rains. But when you plot temperature versus precipitation at this scale, where your 20 millimeters of precipitation equals 10 degrees Celsius, and you plot the two, when the line dips under the temperature line, when the precipitation line dips under the temperature line, you're in a period of pretty intense stress. So this is the very, very dry season of that habitat. And like I said earlier in the talk, when you do this and when you look at this, I know this kind of seems esoteric from a birder. You're thinking, well, hang on, why am I bothering with this? When you start to look at these graphs, you really get a feel of what are the driving influences on that habitat, and you can generally start to read between them. And then we have lots of habitat photos. So this is the shot giving you an idea of what it is where there are no baobabs in this area. This is what it looks like when it's in the scrubbier form, when it's in a taller form. And these are all from around Ifati and Tulier in southwest Madagascar. And then we go through the birds you have there, like your long-tailed ground roller, your Verreaux's koa, Madagascan button quail. and your subdesert mesite. Now, 3 of those were actually were endemic families. So that's just the button quails are found throughout the world, but the other 3 are all endemic to Madagascar. So that's a situation where you've got endemic families, but within it, the birds can move through and they've got representatives in all the different habitats. So we're also trying to create a database of every habitat in the world and the bird assemblage for every habitat in the world. And the idea is that you should be able to that link up with the books. Someone can go online and say, all right, let's just say, I'm going to Namakuru. Give me a bird list of Namakuru. And then I've got a different group here, but the concept is you give me a bird list, and this thing can shoot out the bird list for that area with the relationship between the birds and the habitat. So it's all based on whether something is an obligate, that's a bird that's only found in that habitat, a strong indicator, a bird that's mainly found in that habitat, but can be in a few. Weak indicators are birds that think about it when you're out there and you say, oh yeah, okay, that's kind of, black harrier, that's kind of Karoo or fynbos, that's kind of, very weak. And present is a bird that's there, but doesn't tell you anything about it. Like a widespread bird doesn't really tell you too much about the location. And an example here, I'm just going to read that. Black and white striped flycatcher. Sorry, a brubu, sorry. A brubu, found for Kalahari thorn scrub. Yeah, but it's also found in Gusu. Doesn't really tell you that much. But the idea of the database is that you can pull that in. But what you can also do is go and pull out a bird, type in a bird, and that'll come through and tell you all of the habitats that bird occurs in and its relationships. So this is kind of the back end. This is not what you buy in the book. The book is fun to read, lots of side boxes, generally very easy, not too taxing. And then you go into the ecology section and you can dive deeper. But then when you use this combined with the book, it becomes a very, very powerful tool. Because what happens is, you go from a bird list of an unknown location, it'll tell you the likelihood of that habitat, and then you can stretch it across to your others. So this is the thing that links up with fynbos. Okay, or fynbos, sorry. Is if you had this bird list on the right, you'd have, okay, noisy scrub bird, western bristle bird. Okay, all right, okay. These are telling you that it's this habitat. Then that habitat comes in and tells you on a global system, regardless of whether it's the International Vegetation Classification or the IUCN system, it'll tell you it's one of these seasonally dry heat scrubs, and then tells you what they are in the others. Then the way we've got it done is that shoots out the answer and tells you that it's fynbos. Okay, the equivalent habitat in Africa to this would be fynbos. Or if we go down the other way, is if you were there and you wanted to know what it was, and I'm using this again, but it could be any kind of system, is you go into the one, you type it in, it tells you what it is in the 2 systems, and then it gives you the examples. So if you were thinking about looking at, say, the deciduous forest example, the Angolan deciduous forest, you type it in, where would we be here? Yeah, that would tell you that it would be T1. It would come and tell you T1 tropical dry forest, comes through to our forest, dry deciduous, and then move on. And it would say, if you're in South America, these would be your equivalent habitats. If you're in Australia, this would be your equivalent habitats. It's incredibly powerful for people to get a really, not only a grasp of what they've got in their area, but seeing how it relates to around the world. So thanks. Buy the book. I make 35 cents a copy. So you can see that, I'm absolutely in it for the money. There you go.
Sorry, I was talking on mute there. Thanks very much, Ian. That was a really interesting presentation, and I must say I really thank you for doing it in the middle of your night. Folks, if
Fine.
you've got any questions for Ian, feel free to just type them in the chat. We'll try not to keep him too much longer.
No, I'm open.
Um, any questions, anybody? Um, how do you deal with, I'll ask a question if you don't mind. How do you deal with migratory birds in this situation where they spend part of their lives in one habitat and then in a different part of the world occupy a
Mm.
different, completely different habitat, like river warblers, for example?
Okay, within a continent, that it's more difficult within a continent than between them. So when you go into the system, you're talking about using it for bird assemblages to define.
Yeah, because they move between radically different assemblages.
Yeah, so with that obligate, the obligate and weak indicator, strong indicator, that's tied into the continent in which you're doing it. So a bird moving between continents is dead easy. It's just got different classifications. Within a continent, it's tough. We've got it in the system that it can pick up months, but we don't have it to that yet. So you've got to know that okay, the bird will be, you'll be in your scrub. I'll use shorebirds because they're the they're dead easy. Um, that it'll be on mud flats in southern Africa and then move through. And even the shorebirds may fly overland. Um, they're marked as present for areas that they're not spending, that it's not used as an indicator. So generally breeding grounds are where you do the weaks or strongs. Presence of a migrant and wintering grounds, again, you do the weaks or the strong. But within the continent, you can't really use it to do migrants. You put the information in, and if you had a list with migrants, it goes in the database. It should still shoot out the habitat, but to say straight for an individual bird, I've got it in this habitat in, say, spring migration. It's it won't give it to you with a migrant bird. You need a bird assemblage, and most birds won't give it to you. You need an assemblage of birds to work out what you're in.
Mm. Right. Any other questions? Somebody says, when will the Central and South American book be ready?
Central and South America book will be out the year after next, early the year after next. Asia comes out next year. So yeah, Europe and Australia out late this year, Asia out next year, mid next year, South America and Oceania are out the year after that. Um, okay, so
Uh,
let me, yeah.
oh, you were gonna, yeah, you go ahead and read the question. And
Um, yeah, the habitat book, very broad macro. It depends on the location. So broad macro, if you're in the Sahara, yes. And what you'll notice when you go through the book is you've got areas of dark green and pale green. A dark green is where it's mapped and where it can be geolocated. And the pale green is where it is possible, okay? Sometimes probable. But when you're using in some areas, we can geolocate to a very, very fine scale. So we've actually got it as an app. So you're walking along. We're building apps as well with this. You'll be able to go along and hit geolocate, and it'll tell you what your habitat is mapped as. Um, but it won't tell you your habitat is mapped as this, but also mapped as these other ones. That's where the pale green is. So you can, if you're in South Africa, the mapping is very detailed because we had very detailed mapping to build it on. I'm not a mapper, okay? What I've done is I've got to assume that the basal units of any mapping system is as good as it gets, and I can recalibrate those. But I'm not going out and mapping myself. I'm not interpreting the Landsat imagery or the air photos. I'm basing it on what others are using. So in South Africa, we based some of it on broad Sandby maps that we realigned. So it's the idea that we don't remap, we realign what people are mapping. Um, so for the Sahara, probably loose. I would say um, the Somalia area is very loose, but once you get into East Africa, South Africa, and the southern belts of West Africa, it's pretty it's pretty fine scale. Uh, all right. Oh, thanks, Miranda. Okay, I'm Rich reading. Thanks for discussing your book. Incredible project. Okay. Um, where there was another question there, was it?
There was
Oh,
a
what?
question about
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No, I was just going to say there was a question about the percentage of the African avifauna that are habitat specialists occurring in a single habitat.
Mm, yeah. So I would say probably 5% would be obligates, and another 10% would be strong indicators. Um, the but what's really fascinating is comparing what Africa has. So Australia, Africa, and South America are all we've got lots of habitats with obligates. We've got many habitats with obligates and strong indicators. North America, the birds are mainly weak indicators, and this is what you're talking about with migration. Because so many of the North American birds are migrants, and when they're migrating, they're in all various habitats. It's hard to get them in obligates and strong indicators. Um, Asia, it's difficult because the area has been so trashed. A lot of, say, China, for example, or the eastern, yeah, I mean, north of Vietnam, eastern China is completely trashed until you get way north of Beijing. So it's hard to put birds into habitat because it's hard to really work out what's a modern habitat and what's an old one. So there we've got more weeks. And Europe, the birds are generalists. So if you think about compare Africa with Europe, the birds in Africa, so many more of them are tied to a specific habitat. So if you were to use weeks, you're probably up at 40% of African birds would be weak indicators of a habitat. Um, so yeah, when you get and when you start to see a bird list, an African bird list, if you've got, say, 10 birds on that list, you're pretty close to working out where you are. If you go out birding and get 10
Yeah.
birds on that bird list, you can work out what you're in just on the bird
Mhm.
list alone. Whereas in Europe, it's very difficult.
Yeah. I think we also have a lot of different habitats in a much smaller area than in Europe, where it's a lot more homogeneous. Um, I mean, you've got mountains and things, but the habitats I think are much more homogeneous, and of course, it's much smaller as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
Smaller,
mean,
yeah, 'cause if you were to do that on a percentage basis, it might not hold because you've got huge areas of northern Africa that have very
mm,
broad areas of the same habitat. So certainly southern Africa is more complicated than Europe, and Eastern Africa is. Um, but it's just that Europe's had these bottlenecks of extinction. So the birds that occur there generally you could be in vastly different habitats with the same bird assemblages in Europe, whereas you don't get that in Africa.
mm,
You swap habitats in Africa, and you're in a different group of birds. Okay, hang on, wait up. I'm not from Africa. Can I use the guide as an up-to-date level? Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Can you use the book as an yes, absolutely. That's what the book's for. So, sorry I didn't mention this earlier. The book is designed for people to okay, you're going. um, you're not sure where to go. So I sell bird trips to Africa, right? And it's a common thing to have someone come up to me and say, "Well, I want to go to Africa." Okay, but I want to go to Africa. Well, what do you want to see? And so I tell people, okay, and I know it sounds kind of strange, but close your eyes and tell me, what are you seeing when you think Africa? Because some people will say, well, okay, I see flat top trees and grassland. Okay, so you're talking East Africa. So you probably want to go to Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda for that kind of thing. If they talk about, dry plains and sand dunes, then I'm thinking, all right, you're probably talking about Namibia in your mind when you imagine Africa. This book is designed for people to pick it up and then have a feel for, okay, this is what's there. This is what's there in the different regions, and this is where I want to go. So you're not going to use the book to pick it up and say, I can identify this bird with it. It doesn't replace any mammal or bird field guide. It's not what it's there for. What it's there for is to give you a sense of being. So this is okay. This is what this habitat is, and this is where it is, um, and decide what you want to visit. So in the presentation, I didn't show a plate very early on in the book. We've got regional descriptions. So if you're thinking about, okay, I want to go somewhere in Southern Africa, you've got triangles that show you, okay, depending on what you're kind of interested in, this is where you go. These are all the habitats that occur within that region. So you can come at it from multiple ways. You can come at it as, all right, I'm thinking of Africa and I know I want to go and visit dune deserts. All right, so you go into the desert section and it'll tell you these are the two. You've either got the Saharan dune systems or you've got the Namibian dune systems. And if you were to say lowland rainforests, okay, well, you've got predominantly your West African lowland rainforest block or your Central African lowland rainforest block. Um, but if you come in it from a regional perspective and say, right, I'm thinking of going to Ethiopia, what can I get there? You can do it that way as well, because you can open up and say, all right, I'm talking about this East Africa area. I'm going to go to Ethiopia. All right, there are loads of these crazy paramos that look like South American, the top of the Andes. You've got these Afro-montane grasslands. You've got the forest, the montane forests. So you can do it that way as well. Did that help you with your question?
It helped me understand a lot from a different
Okay.
perspective. So even if it didn't, it was useful.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the idea is not, the book's not written to show how clever we are. The books are written to be easily accessible, and we really had to toss up with putting Latin names in, so scientific names in. So in the global book, the first one, we didn't have global names for reptiles. Um, in this book, when you're reading and you're just getting the Latin names all the time, or the scientific names, it can be slightly off-putting. So in the description of the habitats, we give the scientific names for all the plants because there is no common language for plants. We also do it for herps because there's a lot more of the herps don't have common names. So, and it would look weird to be reading a book and saying, you know, say Northern Death Adder, Southern Death Adder, and then a bunch of scientific names. So with herps, you have the common name and then the scientific name. But with birds and mammals, we don't. Birds and mammals, you only have the common names. And that's to keep the book flowing, keep it as accessible as possible to the broadest range of people. So these are written at a level where anyone can pick it up and get lots of interesting information, but it's also deep enough that people could use it as as a reading material for an ecology course on Africa. And the North America ones are being used that they're all being they're being put into different ecology courses as just a general overview. Okay, this is how you can actually describe the systems there.
Hmm, that's cool. I think we'll let you go and let you get a few more hours sleep before you have to wake up and go traipsing around again.
Yeah, 2:45. Oh, I've got a good 2.5 hours sleep ahead of me. All right.
Yeah. Good
Thank
luck,
you. Thank
man,
you
getting
very
some
much.
sleep. And thanks very much for doing this in the middle of the night. Really appreciate it.
All right. It was fun. All
Cheers,
right.
and thanks
Bye-bye.
everybody for attending. Bye.